They threw Coca-Cola on a biaka woman at work. Her alone, our husband walks in and fire us everyone. It was supposed to be just another day in the office. Just another day of typing, answering phones, filing reports. But for Danielle, the only black woman in her department, every day felt like walking into a storm she didn't create, whispered jokes when she walked by, side glances at her natural hair, the accidental exclusion from lunch invites. She had learned to swallow the little stings, to smile through the pain, to pretend the air wasn't poisoned with quiet prejudice. But this day would be different. This day, the storm became a hurricane. The laughter started first. A group of coworkers huddled near the break room, giggling like children. Danielle tried to ignore it until she felt it. The sudden splash, ice-cold liquid exploding down her blouse, sticky soda dripping from her curls to the floor. A can of Coca-Cola thrown at her. On purpose, the room went silent. Except for the laughter, her chest burned not just from humiliation, but from centuries of history echoing inside her. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But she stood frozen, her hands trembling as the laughter of her colleagues filled the air. And then the door opened. A man in a tailored suit. Confident, calm, eyes sharp as steel. Danielle's husband, though no one in that office knew it yet. Not just any man, a billionaire CEO. A man with the power to end careers with a single word. The laughter died instantly. And that's when everything changed. Danielle had learned early on that being the only one in the room carried a weight no one else could feel. The office was polished, glass walls shining, motivational posters plastered across hallways, but beneath that polished surface lived something far more toxic. Every morning, as she walked through those doors, she braced herself. The greetings were always polite, but they were never warm. Smiles stretched across faces, but never touched the eyes. She was the one people always noticed, not for her skill or dedication, but because she stood out in a place where everyone else looked the same. She was the diversity in the group photos, her face front and center in the company newsletter when leadership wanted to boast about inclusion. But when the cameras disappeared, so did their attention. In meetings, her ideas were dismissed until someone else repeated them in a different voice, a different skin. When it happened, no one noticed. Or maybe they noticed, and that was the point. The jokes were subtle, but sharp enough to pierce. Comments about her hair, about how brave she was for wearing it natural. Snide remarks about her lunch, followed by wrinkled noses and forced laughter. Invitations to after-work drinks or lunches with the team somehow never reached her inbox. The office calendar said all-staff meeting, but it never meant all staff, not for her. Her boss praised her work privately, thanking her for going above and beyond, calling her the backbone of the team. Yet when promotions came, when recognition was given publicly, it was always someone else. She was useful but never celebrated, respected only behind closed doors, erased in the open. Every day, Danielle pushed harder. She came in early, stayed late, delivered projects flawlessly. She told herself it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Before they realized she wasn't just filling a quota, she was the engine that kept this office running. But the more she gave, the more invisible she became. It wasn't just the actions, it was the silence. No one defended her when the comments were made. No one stepped in when she was interrupted in meetings. People pretended not to hear, pretended not to see. And that silence was louder than the words themselves. Danielle carried those moments like invisible chains. Every whisper, every dismissal, every forced smile was another link. She didn't show it on her face, but she felt it in her chest, heavy, suffocating. Some days, it was so thick she could barely breathe. And yet she showed up, day after day, holding her head high even as those chains pulled tighter. The break room was supposed to be a place of pause, a space where coffee cups clinked and keyboards finally went quiet. For most people in the office, it was a safe corner, a spot for louder gossip and lighthearted chatter. For Danielle, it was never quite that simple. She walked in knowing eyes would follow her, scanning, measuring, waiting for some excuse to turn her into the subject of another whisper. That morning, she just wanted to grab her tea and return to her desk, but the air felt heavier than usual, charged with something she couldn't name yet. The group was already gathered near the vending machines, huddled close, their voices lowered but not low enough. She felt the shift the moment she entered, the pause, the sideways glances, the quick smirks that spread like wildfire between them. She'd seen it before, the way people looked at her as if she was walking into their punchline. She kept her shoulders straight, her gaze fixed forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The laughter broke out first, sharp and cutting, like a sound made just to remind her she wasn't welcome. One of them muttered something under his breath. Another giggled, and then came the sudden shout. a voice raised high enough for the whole room to hear. "Catch this!" Before she could process, before she could even turn, the impact hit, the cold, heavy slam of an aluminum can striking her shoulder. Bursting open with a spray of sticky brown liquid, the soda spilled across her blouse, soaked into her curls, and ran down her arms in streams of sugar and ice. The shock stole her breath. The smell of syrup and carbonation rose around her like smoke from a fire, clinging to her skin as the room erupted. The sound of laughter filled every corner. Some covered their mouths, pretending to be horrified, but their eyes betrayed them. Others didn't bother hiding it, their grins wide, their shoulders shaking as they doubled over in amusement. No one rushed forward. No one reached out. No one said stop. Danielle stood rooted to the floor, her chest heaving, her mind spinning in disbelief. The humiliation burned hotter than the cold soda dripping from her hair. She knew instantly this wasn't clumsy. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. A statement disguised as a joke. An act meant to strip her dignity in front of everyone. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her throat tightened, a scream begging to break free, but centuries of stories of warnings of consequences pressed down on her tongue. If she reacted, she would be labeled angry. If she stayed silent, she would be broken. The laughter kept rising around her, each sound a blade cutting deeper, and the air in the room turned unbearable. The door swung open with a soft click, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The laughter, once loud and unrestrained, faltered mid-echo. Eyes darted to the doorway, and there he stood, tall, composed, dressed in a suit that whispered power without him needing to say a word. His presence alone carried weight, the kind that demanded silence. Every conversation died on the spot. Every smirk stiffened. It was as if the entire room had been caught doing something shameful, and in truth, they had. Danielle's chest tightened when she saw him, her husband, the man no one in this office knew about. She had kept that part of her life private, preferring to walk in her own light, to be measured by her own effort. To them, she was just another employee, another face in a cubicle. What they never imagined was that the woman they mocked was loved and cherished by someone who moved in a world far beyond theirs. He stepped inside slowly, his gaze sweeping across the break room. Not a glance, not a casual look. His eyes pierced through every person standing there. The air thickened with unease. Coworkers shifted on their feet, unable to hold his stare, suddenly fascinated with the floor or the vending machine. Then his eyes softened as he looked at her. "Danielle," he said, his voice steady but carrying warmth that belonged only to her. The way he said her name silenced the last nervous giggles, replacing them with confusion. He crossed the room in purposeful strides, pulling a folded handkerchief from his pocket. With care, he reached for her face, dabbing gently at the soda dripping from her cheek. It was such a small act, yet in that moment it carried the weight of everything. Respect, tenderness, protection. The contrast was jarring, the cruelty of her colleagues against the quiet love in his touch. The room froze as realization dawned. This was not just a husband arriving to console his wife. This was a man they recognized from headlines, from financial journals, from whispers about power and influence. A billionaire, a CEO, a man whose signature could alter careers, whose investments built and destroyed companies. And he was standing in their break room, witnessing the aftermath of their cruelty. Danielle lowered her gaze, trembling, but not from fear. His presence was a shield now, one she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. When he finally straightened, his hand still holding hers, his expression changed. The softness vanished, replaced by steel. His voice, when it came again, carried no warmth, only fire. "Who did this?" he asked, his words sharp enough to cut through the silence like glass. No one answered, no one dared. The guilty looked away, their bravado stripped bare. The ones who had laughed loudest suddenly found themselves choking on their own silence, unable to meet the storm building in his eyes. He didn't need a confession to know the truth. The room told on itself. The guilty ones couldn't hide, their faces flushed, their shoulders hunched, their laughter still dying in their throats. He saw them all, the smirkers who had enjoyed every second of Danielle's humiliation, the ones who thought cruelty was a form of entertainment. His eyes lingered on each one, long enough for them to feel the weight of their own actions pressing back at them. "You think this is funny?" His voice was low, but it cut deeper than a shout could have. It echoed through the break room, a reminder that the joke was never harmless, that it was soaked in something far uglier. He moved forward, slow, deliberate, like a judge stepping into a courtroom. The power in his tone wasn't only authority, it was outrage wrapped in control, fury sharpened into precision. No one dared to respond. Silence thickened until it became suffocating. Every shuffle of a shoe, every nervous swallow was amplified in that tense space. He could see it, the fear beginning to creep into their expressions, the regret that came not from empathy but from being caught. Humiliating a black woman at work, he said, his voice rising now, is not a mistake, it is not a prank, it is who you are. And people who think like you have no place here. The word struck harder than any punishment they had imagined, because he was not another employee they could dismiss, not a manager they could charm or avoid. He was power itself standing in their break room. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone with a calmness that terrified them more than shouting ever could. One tap, one call, and their careers would crumble. They all knew it. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to make threats. The weight of his reputation carried every unspoken consequence. I fund this company. I keep these lights on. And I will not stand by while the people who rely on my money degrade the woman I love. His gaze cut across the room like a blade, landing on the ringleaders, the ones who had thrown the can, the ones who had laughed first, their faces drained of color, their mouths open to beg, to stumble out excuses, to claim it wasn't what it looked like. But excuses dissolved under the ice of his stare. The desperation began, mumbled apologies, stuttering pleas, the kind of regret that appears only when punishment is certain. But none of it mattered. He had already decided. The break room, once buzzing with cruel laughter, now stood in a suffocating silence. The smell of spilled soda still lingered in the air, sticky and sharp, but the energy had shifted completely. Danielle's blouse clung to her skin, damp and heavy, but for the first time all day, she didn't feel like the smallest person in the room. Her husband's presence filled every corner, and the same people who had sneered at her minutes before now avoided her eyes, their shame settling like dust around them. She stood straighter, though her body trembled, not from fear, but from the release of years of swallowed pain. All those days of being overlooked, all those comments she'd endured in silence, all the moments she'd carried herself with dignity while others chipped away at it. It all seemed to hang in the air, undeniable now. There was no pretending anymore. The cruelty was exposed in the harsh light of consequence, and no one could laugh it away. Her husband kept his arm around her, a gesture so small yet so loud. It was protection, yes, but also recognition, a public acknowledgement that she mattered, that she was not invisible, not expendable. Every eye in the room saw it, and every eye dropped away because they knew they had tried to strip her of that very thing. The boss lingered at the edge of the crowd, pale and sweating, his usual authority dissolved in the presence of someone far greater. He looked torn between stepping forward to defend his staff and shrinking back into the wallpaper. He had allowed this culture to fester, had turned his back on the whispers and the side jokes, had let the chains tighten around Danielle day after day. Now he stood exposed too, a silent accomplice in a theater of humiliation. Danielle could feel the weight of every stare as she and her husband began moving toward the door. Each step was heavy with meaning, her shoes sticking slightly on the wet floor where the coke had splattered. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. With every stride, she reclaimed something that had been stolen from her piece by piece, her dignity, her presence, her voice, even in silence. The office didn't feel like hers anymore, not after what had been revealed. But she knew as they walked past the desks, past the glass walls, past the stunned faces, that something deeper had shifted. For the first time, they saw her not as a token, not as an outsider, not as the subject of their jokes, but as a woman who had survived their cruelty and stood taller in its aftermath. This wasn't just about a can of soda. It wasn't just about an office prank gone too far. This was about the weight of history, about the pain of being dismissed, dehumanized, and treated as less than day after day until the breaking point comes. Danielle's story is not rare. Millions live it every day. They endure whispers, jokes, subtle exclusions, and outright humiliation, all because of the color of their skin, their gender, their background. And too often no one steps in. Too often the laughter is louder than the defense. But this story reminds us that silence is complicity, that injustice doesn't dissolve on its own. It must be confronted. It must be called out. It must be stopped. And maybe not everyone has a billionaire husband who can walk in and fire the guilty. But all of us have a voice. All of us have a choice. We can laugh along with cruelty, or we can stand against it. In the end, the question isn't what happened to Danielle. The question is, when it happens again, and it will, what will you do?